Welcome to the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. I'm the sports editor of the Herald Democrat, Jason De La Rosa, and you're listening to the latest edition of the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. We are at Thanksgiving. I hope you're enjoying time with your family. I hope you enjoy traveling this time of year. And if you have a team left in the high school playoffs, I hope you enjoy the day after Thanksgiving because that's when we hit the region semifinals, the third round of the playoffs. We have two teams left here in Texoma. We unfortunately lost three teams from last week. We'll recap the area round. We'll talk about what's in store for this week. Hopefully we have some teams that get to December. We talk about it all here on the podcast, which is brought to you by Frontier Golf Carts Texoma. Experience the thrill of savings to celebrate their new Denison location, proudly serving the greater Texoma area, where they're launching with the lowest prices of the year. This marks an exciting new chapter in the 11-year history of Frontier Golf Carts as they expand from their original location in Salina. For their grand opening, come see the awesome collection of new carts with up to $1,500 off, including the 2024 Frontier EV Lightning F4 with all seats facing forward. New lithium battery-powered golf carts with backup cameras and touchscreen entertainment start at $7,495. Visit frontiergolfcarts.com or check out their Facebook page for the latest specials. And if you would like to sponsor the podcast, we still got a couple left, hopefully, here in 2024, but you want to get a head start on 2025, contact Renee Marler at rmarler@cherryroad.com. So since we only have two teams left, we're going to do it a little differently here this week. We're going to talk about all the teams that got eliminated first. Then we'll talk about the two matchups happening on Friday, since we've got a lot more of teams that did get eliminated this week compared to the first couple rounds of the playoffs where we had a bigger mix going forward. So we will start from the top to the bottom in respect to the teams that were eliminated. So we'll start in 4A. We'll talk about Van Alstyne and their 45-42 loss against Van. This was the game that I went to on Friday night, since we all had all the teams, all five of the games were on Friday this past week, which I will say I was a little disappointed with. I was hoping that there would have been one or two still on the Thursday to be able to get to two teams last week. Unfortunately, was only able to get to one. Went to this game, and it was a close game like we thought it might be. Two teams with the same record coming in at 8-3. Two teams that had very good offenses, and was talking with somebody in the press box, and you get there and you see people, and that I had yet to see Van Alstyne in person this season, but obviously we've talked about them every week, and I've seen the box scores, and you're talking with Coach Miller at times, doing the preview and during the season about what Van Alstyne was, and somebody asked, what do you think of this, the matchup and everything, and I said this has shootout written all over it. This has a back and forth game. This has not a whole lot of if there were big plays on defense, there were going to be turnovers. I didn't think there was going to be a whole lot of stops in this game, and it lived up to that. It was a very back and forth game. It did come down to the final minute of the game, that it came down to an onside kick attempt to try to keep the game going, and it was a fun back and forth battle, and it was two offenses that were diametrically opposite. You had one that was getting all its production through the passing game. Van did a really good job with that, and Van Alstyne was able to do a majority of its damage on the ground. It did have some big plays in the passing game, but the ground game was where it did its best work, and it worked for both of those teams to turn this into the shootout that it was. The big story, unfortunately, ended up being an injury with Van Alstyne quarterback Brady Carson. Last play of the third quarter, he gets hurt trying to brace himself, injures his wrist on a run that ended up being the last play of the third quarter, and at that point it's a it's a close game. It's a tie game. You have a chance to Van Alstine was down 7. There's a lot of scoring in that third quarter, going back and forth. So Van Alstine's down 7, but they have the ball and they're driving to tie the game. They're just outside the red zone when Carson gets hurt, and if he doesn't get hurt, who knows? That it will be the what if of this game, because he misses the entire fourth quarter, and Braden Miller has to come in and take control of the offense, and Van Alstine's not able to do anything on that possession, and Van gets the ball back, is able to kill basically 5+ minutes and kick a field goal to go up by 10 at 45-35, and give credit to Van Alstine at that point. You're like, man, our quarterback's out. We're down by 10. There's only 4.5 minutes left in this game. They go down and score, make it the final margin, but they get it to 3 points. There's 49 seconds left. They have to do the onside kick. They don't get it. If they did, they would have had plenty of time, and they would have had an opportunity to, at the very least, get in position to kick a field goal and force overtime. Like I said, they weren't able to get the onside kick, and Van ran the clock out. But again, a really good effort by the Panthers. Carson, essentially in 3 quarters, 28 carries for 248 yards, had 3 touchdown runs, including one right out of the half, 69 yards on the first play, when it looked like Van had a big second quarter, scored 3 times there, was up 28 to take a 28-21 lead at halftime, and then 11 seconds into the second half, one play, boom, he gets loose, and it's tied. And that's, like I said, then you had back and forth. Van scored, then Carson scored again, and then Van scored again. It was a really fun game, and I think you never know how things would have played out if that happens. But again, he had almost 250 yards in 3 quarters. He was also 6 of 11 passing for 128 yards. Braden Miller, 6 of 10 passing for 61 yards. Did have 2 touchdown runs. He had one earlier in the game to go with the one at the end. Michael Upchurch had a touchdown run as well. Miller led the way in receiving, 3 catches for 81 yards. Jackson Skinner, 4 catches for 59 yards. They did a good job between those two of hitting some big plays, taking advantage of some busts in the secondary to get those big gains and move the ball into Van territory. But again, unfortunately for Van Alstine, the season ended here. They would have played Sunnyvale next week, this week, after Sunnyvale knocked off Gilmer, who was obviously we said that was a big game there. And Van Sunnyvale is a rematch from earlier in the season, so that's, I don't say that's kind of disappointing from Van Alstine's standpoint of that they had a chance to go on and play somebody in the third round. It would have been the first time in over a decade that they had gotten to the third round, but still a really good season for Van Alstine. We talked about winning a district title, becoming the team to beat in that district after Aubrey left in realignment. They had been second the last couple of years, so I think everybody just needed to wait and see with some of the new characters in that district, but a lot of them were holdovers, and Van Alstine had taken care of business against them. They just couldn't do it against Aubrey. So what could they do if they were the team to beat? And they proved that they were the team to beat. Nobody could beat them. They go undefeated to win a district title. They finish at 8-4, and it's going to be interesting going forward because again we say this unfortunately this time of year for everybody, whether you have success or not, it is all about who do you have coming back. Who do you have filling in at the key positions, and obviously when it comes to this sport, the biggest of those positions is quarterback. Um, and this year, that was one of the questions that Van Alstine had, because they were replacing a quarterback who had multiple years of starting. You took a guy in Brady Carson from a receiver spot, a guy who was a playmaker all over the offense. Coach Miller said before the season, we're going to take the best guy or the best athlete, and we're going to put him with the ball in his hands. So now that's going to be the case going forward. What's the plan? What is the plan there to find a guy at quarterback? But you had a lot of guys throughout the roster, both sides of the ball, that are gone from this group. Whether you're talking about staying on offense, and you talk about somebody like a Castor Fonseca at receiver as one of those other receivers, whether it's Miller, whether it's Tim Moore, seeing time at quarterback, obviously then that opens things up from a playing time standpoint for receivers. Defensively, you talk about a guy with guys with multiple years starting, like a Weston Landros at linebacker. Some guys in the secondary, a Knox Wilson. There's going to be those, a guy like Jackson Skinner who started on both sides of the ball. There's going to be some holes to fill there, and like Coach Miller said after the game, if you get to a point like this now where not just are you making the playoffs, they've continually shown that they can get past the first round of the playoffs. Now you're talking about being a defending district champion against the same teams that you just won it against. That is sort of now the bar and the standard of what the expectations can be for them. And if they fill those holes, they're gonna have a good shot. Again, it was a very competitive district. Came down to the wire for a lot of the teams, whether they were in or out, depending on those last outcomes in the final week of the regular season. And we've talked about Van Alstine had 3 games that went down to the wire. 2 of them went to overtime. They were able to win all 3 of those games. Sometimes that's luck. Sometimes that's skill. They found a way to win those games, and the question would be, can they continue to win those types of games if it comes down to it next year? So again, another good season for Van Alstine. Just unfortunately couldn't break through to the third round. They've been close the last couple of years getting to the area round. They had to deal with Carthage the last couple of years. They thought they would have a chance this time, and they did. And like I said, if things are different with an injury going into the fourth quarter, maybe we're talking about Van Alstine getting ready to play Sunnyvale this week. But they end up losing to Van 45-42 in their 4A Division II Region 2 area round game last week. Moving down to the 3A level, we have the Bells Panthers, who had their season come to an end 21-0 against Tolar. We will talk a little bit about Tolar in coming up, because that's a potential opponent in the region final. But this was a game where you had 2 teams that have been in the playoffs, that have made some deep runs. Tolar, like we said, last year was the 2A Division I runner-up. They've moved up to 3A. They've continued to have success. And this game was, I don't know if I thought it would go this way, but this was a 7-0 game at halftime. It was a 7-0 game into the fourth quarter, almost to the middle of the fourth quarter. It was still a 7-0 game before Tolar scores again, and then their third touchdown is a pick six with Bells trying to catch the Rattlers off guard, trying to make it 14-7 at that point in the fourth quarter, and it was one of those things. Obviously, it's very impressive, I think, on both sides for these defenses, because Bells with the slot T, they've been very good. They've been able to, they've been able to be successful with that, and they had to really grind this game out. And Tolar is a team that has been very effective offensively. We talked about the numbers that they were putting up, and again, even despite you move up in classification, it sometimes that takes time. Sometimes that you have to adjust to the higher level, and they had done a really good job of acting like nothing had changed for them. They only had the one loss that came in the season opener when Peaster shut them out, and then we talked about the last couple of weeks for them. 49 points, 35 points, 42 points, 41 points, 56 points, 56 points, 42 points in the last 2 months for them. They were on a roll, and Bells flat shut them down. I mean, obviously, they only scored 2 touchdowns on offense. We talked. Peyton Brown was their guy, and honestly, I think they did a relatively good job against him. He had 22 carries for 116 yards, and that's probably a low game for him based on what they've done offensively. They just were able to obviously get some big plays at the right time to have those short touchdown runs, and they scored right before halftime. I mean, it was that close to being scoreless at halftime. And like I said, you've got a pick six in there as well. So Bells did as good as you could imagine against a team that's been really good this season. Jackson Brown had 30 carries for 126 yards. Tucker Kreitz 9 carries for 47 yards. Easton Branham 11 carries for 38 yards. And so Bells again is in the same situation. You get to the second round. You have been doing this, for so many years. It's become the expectation there to at least get to the second round, to be in the mix. Usually for second place, this is the first time in the last 5 years that Bells has not been the runner-up to Gunner in that district. And again, you've got some pieces that you're going to lose. But the one thing we have seen with Bells is that they have been able to churn through guys. We saw this year, and that was kind of the focus of my preview of them this week, and talking about some of the changes that they made offensively, because they had been so banged up, and guys had been in and out of the lineup or just been out of the lineup. They had to move the pieces around to continually get production out of people. That's sort of been the thing. It's like I said, ever since Coach West took over there, it's always kind of been like, oh, now they've got to try to replace this guy or that guy, and there's 2 spots open in the backfield. Who's going to fill them? And it's always sort of been they always seem to find the next guy, and that's been the case for them. And I think obviously, you look at this group, you're losing. I say you're losing a quarterback, but Easton Hartline's been the quarterback, for about the last month, taking over for Easton Branham, moving to a halfback slot. But Branham had been the quarterback the last couple of years. Bryson Thompson's a guy, as a senior, who's going to be gone. Tucker Kreitz is one of those guys who had to deal with an injury this year. On both sides of the ball, that's a spot you're going to have to fill. I mean, obviously Jackson Brown has shown a lot as a sophomore to kind of be the lead guy when it comes to the backfield. So if Hartline stays at quarterback and for his senior year, and you have Brown, who has gotten some serious experience this year. Jadarius Washington is another guy in that sophomore class who got some playing time at points because of the injuries. Had some production there. Blake Reeves is another guy. And he's another sophomore. So that there's a lot of guys in there who have gotten the time because of the injuries and have produced that. But now you're gonna have to do it on an every week basis. You're gonna have to be the guy. But again, that's one thing with with Bells during this run is that they always seem to have some holes to fill, and then you kind of go, well, how are we gonna handle that? And then somebody steps right in. So unfortunately for them, the run ended. It would have been fun to continue to potentially talk about a Bells Gunner rematch. We've come close the last couple of times in the last years with both of them making the region semifinals. Unfortunately, this would have been in the region semifinals because of the way the bracket fell, with Bells getting the 3 seed instead of the 2, and they gave it everything they had. And I think I don't we'll talk about Toller here in a second, but I think that is an interesting it's an interesting matchup about what we could have seen, with that Bells Blue Ridge potential semifinal on one side and Gunner on the other side. It would have said a lot about the district and its strength. And I think looking at this region and looking at the Final Four, which again we'll talk about here in a second, that out of the 8 teams that were playing last week in the area round, that at least 6, maybe 7 of those teams were really good teams. And I think the fact that Bells played Toller this tough says a lot about them. I think the fact that Blue Ridge played Holiday really tough, and probably in a lot of people's minds should have beat them. A crazy ending there to eliminate Blue Ridge. As the 5th and 6th teams, however you want to categorize Bells and Blue Ridge, beyond the Final Four, I think that says a lot about the competitive group in this region, and how the 5th and 6th best teams could easily have been the 3rd and 4th best teams when you look at it. So unfortunately, Bells' season comes to an end, and the 3rd team that we lost this past week was the Tioga Bulldogs at the 2A level in their Class 2A Division 1 Region 2 game against Kearns. This was 33-22. Again, this was also a game that was relatively close for much of the game, especially going to the 4th quarter. Kearns is up 14-0 after the first quarter. It's 14-6. They get a touchdown to go up 21-6 at halftime. Then Tioga gets 2 touchdowns, 2 2-point conversions in the 3rd quarter, so they lead 22-21 going to the 4th. But unfortunately, that's where their scoring stopped, and Kearns scored twice to come away with the victory. And this was a matchup where you had, again, a team that had a record where you kind of said, oh, that's surprising or interesting that team is here. But like we said in the preview last week, Coach Birdwell said, you look at Kearns 6-5, that is not indicative of how good this team is. They played a really tough schedule. They played people really close. They could easily have come into this matchup at 9-2, or no, I guess not. Yeah, it would be 9-3 or 9-2. It would have been 9-2. Just like Tioga did, and that wasn't indicative of how good of a team that they were. So unfortunately, Tioga ends the season at 9-3. Rocky Urich was 13 of 27 passing, 275 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and also ran for a touchdown. Jake David, 4 catches for 72 yards. Johnny Dorpinghouse, 3 catches for 65 yards. Austin Norwood's lone catch was a 39-yard touchdown. Gage Anderson, 2 catches for 34 yards and a touchdown as well. And again, this is one of those where it's obviously disappointing for Tioga getting to the region semifinals last year. That was the baseline for a group that brought back so many guys. There's a lot of these seniors that are 4-year starters, or at the very least 3-year starters, and it's going to be this was supposed to be, the gradual performance, the first couple years, under Coach Rogers before he left to go to Sanger. They were able to make the playoffs. They were able to win district titles. They just weren't able to win in the playoffs. They got there as freshmen and sophomores, and a lot of those guys were key contributors and big parts of that. They just came up short once they got there. And then last year, they make that run to the third round. You look at all the spots on the field, and you can say, wow, there's all these juniors everywhere. There's some sophomores that are contributing to that run. The only question was going to be who's going to be the quarterback, because Hayden Hillier was graduated after his 1 year, which was an amazing year. But he was that was a whole. Rocky Urick ends up winning the job, has a really good year despite missing, a couple games himself due to injury, and they're expecting to get to the region semifinals to be playing after Thanksgiving again this year, and again they come up just short of that goal. And I would have loved to have seen, Kearns is going to play Hamilton. We obviously have talked about them because that's who beat Whitewright in the bi-district round. I think that would have been a really fun matchup because, again, we talked about a lot of people looked at that matchup as potentially the best two teams in the region. The winner of that had a really good shot to be the region champ, to go to the state semifinals. And unfortunately, Tioga's not going to get that chance. And again, we talk about filling the holes with what this offense is in terms of throwing the ball around. Obviously, you're going to have a quarterback opening, which is probably going to go to Cole Boyd, who was in the running to be the starter as a sophomore, broke his collarbone, didn't have a chance to end up really competing for that spot. But obviously going into his junior year, he's the likely candidate there. But it's going to be a lot of new faces when it comes to, you look at the top of the leaderboard for receiving. Johnny Dorpinghouse was a senior, had over 1,000 yards. Austin Norwood led them in receiving touchdowns. He's a senior. Sam Mott is a guy who is a senior as well. Now, there's going to be some guys back. Jake David was a sophomore this year. Greeley McAden was a junior this year. Those are guys that were in those, third and fourth or fourth and fifth roles. Because, you had a guy like Gage Anderson who's a senior, whether in the backfield or split out. So now those guys are looking to go from, now you've got to go from the number 4 option to the number 1 option. Can they handle that? That's going to be the challenge for this offense to kind of keep moving the way that they would like it to. And I think, again, the same thing on defense. A lot of these guys are some two-way guys. But again, there are some young guys that were playing on defense last year that you're going to have to step up, be even more of a leader next year. And again, I think you're going to go into the year saying we're trying to defend another district title. Can we do that? They were able to do that with an undefeated record this year. And so that's that. Again, the expectations are a lot higher than they were a couple years ago, and unfortunately, Tioga was unable to get back to the region semifinals. Like I said, it would have been a really fun matchup with Hamilton. I think that would have been an offensive display. But like I said, you got to give credit to a team like Kearns. They were, they were up in this game by a couple scores. Suddenly they were trailing, and unfortunately they were able to, make the plays in big spots in the fourth quarter compared to what Tioga was able to do. They were able to get up, by that double-digit score, and give them credit for, slowing down an offense that has not had those issues, really since I don't want to say the season opener against Collinsville, but they, I mean, if you look at the three losses, scoring 13 points against Collinsville, 22 points against Lone Oak, and the 22 points last week, that was basically that was the story of their losses. Was that those teams were Collinsville, Lone Oak, and Kearns were able to find a way to get this offense out of rhythm, to find a way to I mean, I don't say necessarily shut it down, but to hold them in check compared to what they did in their other games. When you talk about putting up, in the 40s, in the 50s, in the mid 30s, that was all their other games. They were able to overwhelm people, basically in almost all their wins. And so that's where Tioga sits, is can you bounce back? Can you be in the hunt again in a very parity driven district where, again, we saw things come down to the last week, and I would expect, whether it's for the district title, for seeding, for a playoff spot, I think there's going to be a lot of that again, in District 6 2A Division 1. And Tioga's the favorite till somebody beats them. Nobody's been able to keep them out of first for a couple years now. They've had to share it, but nobody's been able to knock them out of first place. So obviously that'll be the first step towards them hopefully having another successful year in 2025. So we got two teams left, and I don't know if it's a surprise or not, but it is probably the two teams that left standing that if you would have said, hey, who are the last two teams that are going to be playing, whether it's the second week of the playoffs, the last week of the playoffs, at any point in the playoffs, who's it going to be? And the last couple of years it has been these two teams. They are still alive and kicking in the third round, and that, of course, is Gunner and Collinsville. And we'll start with Gunner in the 3A Division II Region 2 bracket. They win last week against City View 45-14. And this was, again, another rematch from last season in the exact same round. This was a lot closer than last year, and that's saying something because 45-14 is not necessarily that close. But last year, this game we talked about in the preview was 83-6. So anything or a lot's going to be closer than 83-6. And give City View some credit. This was a 21-7 game at halftime. This was a 28-14 game in the third quarter, but Gunner's able to, one, keep City View from getting anything beyond the 14 points, and then in the third quarter they tack on 10 more points and score again in the fourth quarter to pull away to make it the 45-14 score. They did a majority of it on the ground, which is kind of surprising. It obviously has been it's been a balanced attack for Gunners, during this winning streak, and since the back-to-back losses in week 2 and week 3, but they really dominated on the ground in this one. They had 348 yards, 306 of it came on the ground. A lot of big play touchdowns in this one. Jay Campidi, 8 carries for 115 yards and 2 touchdowns. Easton Overman, 6 carries for 95 yards and 2 touchdowns. Brock Body, 20 carries for 75 yards and a touchdown. Passing game, not doing a whole lot. Preston Tarpley, 8 of 11, but only for 42 yards. Dylan Tokars, 5 catches for 19 yards to lead the receivers. Mitchell Gage, 2 catches for 18 yards. The Tigers also get a 33-yard interception return from Colin Peacock for a score. And again, a sort of a breezy win after halftime to pull away. And so you have Gunner sitting at 10-2. They have won the 9 games in a row. They have dominated in that stretch. They have looked like the team that we thought they were going to be, and they are going to take on Jacksboro. Jacksboro won 62-34 against Scurry Rosser last week. They are 9-3, and I'm sure you're saying, this sounds familiar. And yes, for the third week in a row, Gunner is playing somebody that they played last year in the playoffs. The only difference is that instead of this being the region final last year, when it was 13-0 against 13-0, this is in the region semifinals because Jacksboro, instead of winning that district, they ended up finishing actually third behind Holiday and City View. And so this is a region semifinal game that's going to be at 2 p.m. Friday at Pennington Field in Bedford. And this is a interesting matchup for a couple reasons. Obviously, it's a rematch. This is actually also the third straight year that the teams have met in the playoffs. This is the first game, no disrespect to City View and no disrespect to Trinity Leadership, that I think everybody pointed to on the bracket when it came out and said, this is where it gets interesting. This is where it gets fun. This is where we think we might see Gunner get the first real test. And the reason for that is very simple. Last year, this was the team, or this was the opponent, maybe not the team, because there obviously have been some changes due to graduation on both sides. But this was the game that Gunner had the most trouble. And you look at the way the state championship game went against Tidehaven. You look at the state semifinal with Canadian, and they've had some great matchups. Last year was not, in the pantheon of Gunner and Canadian, it was not up there. Both of those games, you look at those scores, Gunner won 30-14 against Tidehaven, and that score wasn't really that close. Gunner wins by 3 touchdowns against Canadian. And you look at the final score of Gunner Jacksboro and you say, well, Gunner beat Jacksboro by 22 points, which is on par with Canadian, which is on par with, almost on par with a 16-point win in the championship game. The difference was that score last year between Gunner and Jacksboro was 55-33, and it was shocking. It came out of nowhere. A lot of that was because the year before, Gunner had beaten, when I say the year before, 2022, Gunner had beaten Jacksboro 48-7 in a game that wasn't even that close, because I think, if I do recall correctly, Jacksboro scored with 30 seconds left, that wasn't even a close game. And I think a lot of people, and it was a lot of the same kids, and Jacksboro came out. They were by far the best offense that Gunner had played last year. That's the most points that Gunner gave up, the 33. Prosper Walnut Grove, again, a 5A program, who this year, if people, they're still playing this year. They were just kind of a band of misfit toys because they couldn't be in a district. They were just playing people to play people. They put up 24 points on Gunner last year. That was looking to be by far the best against them. But the biggest thing about last year in this matchup was Jacksboro scored the 33 points. In the 11 games before playing Jacksboro, Gunner only allowed 31 points total. They had, 7 shutouts? 2, 4, 6. They had 7 shutouts. 5 of them in a row, 6 of them in the 7 games leading up in the 7 games leading into that game against Jacksboro, Gunner had allowed 1 touchdown, and none of the games had been close. Now, granted, Gunner put up 55, and that was something they had been doing. They had been putting up crazy scores in district: 82-0, 75-0, 63-0. So for Jacksboro to do what it did, that was out of nowhere. But you watched it and you're like, oh my God, this team is good. Like, this team is pushing Gunner like nobody had been able to really push them all season long. And so this is, a lot of these guys are back. There's a new quarterback, but they're having the success that they had for the most part. And you say, well, they're 9-3. Injuries are part of the main reason for that. A lot of people remember their running back from last year. I mean, I think the number one guy that everybody remembers for them, and obviously because he is one of the best in the state, Cannon Valenzuela. He had a ridiculous season last year with I think it was 22 receiving touchdowns. Just ridiculous numbers, and he was a big reason why that game was so close. But they also had a really good running back, and that's what made them so dangerous. Was they had a triplets group. They had a great quarterback, they had a great wide receiver, and they had a great running back in Luke Sams. Well, Sam's missed about a month with an injury. They've had some other guys that they had been counting on, in district play specifically, where they lost to Holiday, which again, there's no shame in losing to Holiday because, Holiday, if there has been a consistent number 2 team in this region behind Gunner, it has been Holiday, based on the so many times that those teams have played in the region final. But Holiday beat them 36-14. And they lost to City View 28-21, and that was the district opener. So Jacksboro was already playing catch up to try to stay near the top of the standings. Then they ended up facing Holiday to end district play, and so that's what sent them down to the 3rd seed. Their other loss was to Jim Ned, 42-40 in non-district play, and Jim Ned is a team that is also still alive in the playoffs. So, and that's, again, you're talking about their first 2 losses. They could easily have won, lose by 7, lose by 2, and we're talking about their only losses to Holiday. And they would have played, and they if that was the case, they would have played Gunner last week. So, but that's neither here nor there. But I think this is a matchup this is where it starts to get interesting for Gunner, because you have a team that is not afraid of them. They have the confidence enough to know that they can play with Gunner, and I think that goes a long way when you play them every year. And the last couple of opponents, it hasn't been close. I think do you go into those games already feeling like you're down a couple touchdowns before you step on the field because of the mystique and the aura and the previous history and all the other stuff? I don't think Jacksboro has that. 2, they know they have the firepower. Again, they've got a guy at receiver in Valenzuela. He's committed to Colorado State. He's been a menace. I think they'll go to him however many times. Even with the quarterback change, they've been really good. Again, offensively, you talk about, obviously, if you just look at the victories, 62 points last week. They opened the playoffs 54-27 against Brady with a win there. In district play, 60 points in a win, 60 points in a win, 52 points in a win, 87 points in a win, 67 points in a win, 47 points in a win. Their worst performance in a victory is 32 points. Everything else, like we said, is is 47 points or better, and so they know they can put up points. And like I said, I don't think they're scared of Gunner, and I think Gunner knows this. Like I said, this is where we get serious. This is a team that is a threat. The winner of this game is going to play the Holiday Toller winner. I don't know what to expect in that one. I think that could be a defensive battle like Toller Bells was last week. It could also be a shootout because I think both of those teams have really good offenses as well. I think, to be honest, if you looked at all four teams, I think you could see any sort of matchup in the region final. A lot of times you look at the matchups and you say, oh, it's very obvious it's going to be these two teams meeting for the region final. Or you look at one side and you say, oh, well, that team's definitely going to beat that team. I think it's as close. And I'm doing this off the top of my head. I think this is as close a Final Four for Gunner in its run, where when you look at all four of the teams and you say that's a team that could be playing in the region final, Gunner's opponent is as good as it's been, and I'm gonna try to kind of look at the last couple while I stall for time to look at some of the last region semifinal matchups to where you kind of said, well, that's a team that kind of I just really don't feel like there's been anybody, in the third round that has given Gunner pause. Last year it was Comanche and that game was 45-0. I don't know if there's anybody in this run. I'm not seeing it in the third round to where they've really been pushed by anybody. And I feel like this is, I'm going all the way back to 2016, and everything in the third round is basically a blowout. So I think this is probably this might be the best Final Four that we've seen since 2016 when Gunner started this run. So they're going to get a very good opponent this week. They're going to get a very good opponent next week, no matter who it is. And, obviously, if we're looking long term, I think that the two teams out in Region 1 that are still alive, Canadian and Wall, I think either one of them is going to be, a very good team to have to deal with to get back to the championship game to try to win a third straight title if you're Gunner. So I'm going to be at this game. I'm very excited about it. I think it's going to be fun. I think Jacksboro's at full strength. And to be fair, Gunner's gotten guys back the last couple of weeks, the last month or so, from some earlier injuries too. So I think everybody knows what's at stake. I think we are officially at the point where on a week-to-week basis, the question is how close is Gunner going to get to a three-peat? They need 4 more wins, and I think every opponent from here on out is going to be a challenge. A lot of these previous runs, it's been an easy run to the semifinals to deal with Canadian, and I think, like I said, this is going to be this next month. If Gunner is able to get to the championship game, they're going to be facing perhaps the toughest road that they've had to any of their titles, just based on who's left and what the bracket looks like. But if any team's going to be able to meet that challenge, it's been Gunner. They're not the 2-time defending champs for nothing. They are not on this 9-game winning streak where they've been destroying people like any of these other seasons. So it's going to be a fun one in the 3A Division 2 Region 2 semifinal. Gunner and Jacksboro, 2 p.m. Friday at Pennington Field in Bedford. And then, of course, the Collinsville Pirates have become a staple here in late November, early December. and they have a Class 2A Division II Region 2 semifinal game against Windthorst. This game is at 1 p.m. on Friday in Springtown, and this is another great matchup. We said last week, you looked at the records, Collinsville and Wellington. Who's going to win? This should probably not be a second round game. That could have been a region semifinal easily. It was that type of matchup of really good programs, and Collinsville was able to win that 24-13 to advance, and that was a game that again, I feel like a lot of these games can go either way. I feel like it's either going to be a defensive battle or it's going to be a shootout. This turned out to be the defensive battle. Almost all of the scoring came in the first half. Collinsville's up 17-13 at halftime. They're able to get a touchdown in the middle of the third quarter to get a little bit of breathing room. But again, that's the only points in the second half. Again, another really good second half defensive performance by the Pirates to make sure that their opponent cannot find a way to come back. And again, it's a little bit of everything for Collinsville. Garrett Trevino, 8 carries for 42 yards and 2 touchdowns. J.J. Jenkins, 24 of 31 passing for 291 yards and a touchdown. Chad Davison, 5 catches for 103 yards. Landry Spivey, 7 catches for 72 yards and a touchdown. Peyton Davidson, 5 catches for 68 yards. Chase Shepard actually led in rushing for Collinsville, 13 carries for 68 yards. Brandon Cantu added 7 carries for 43 yards. And Isaiah Smith kicked a 36-yard field goal right before halftime, which turned a 14-13 game into a 17-13 game. And that obviously was big in terms of helping Collinsville get the double-digit lead early, in the third quarter. Instead of it being an 8-point game, it's an 11-point game, and that goes a long way in terms of strategy in the second half. But again, that was about what I thought this game would be. Again, you have 2 programs that have so much experience winning, so much experience with these deep runs. Like we mentioned, Wellington had made the region semifinals. I think it was 8 years in a row. Or they were going and they were in a different region, and they were realignment does funny things. If Tioga had made it to the region semifinals, last year in the region semifinals they played Marlin. Well, realignment kicked Marlin out of the region, and Marlin is still it's the domino effect of stuff like that is always interesting, and the first year, regardless of the sport, you see it in volleyball or softball or basketball. You never know when a team shifts districts, shifts regions, and how that you don't pay attention to the bracket until it comes out, just because it's hard to gauge until you actually see it. But this is, again, that was a team that came over into the region. And was obviously a very good threat, but again, this I think with Collinsville we focus so much on the offense, and I think for good reason, because they've been so good obviously the previous 2 years, but also what they've been able to do this year, with all and again, they've talked about it. Coach Patterson's talked about it. They were a question mark because so many people graduated. When you're at a small school and you have all these guys that are 3-year starters, what is it going to look like when it's a brand new group? And the offense has answered the bell for sure. I mean, you talk about, scoring in the 50s, scoring in the 40s, outside of the loss to Munster, who we'll end up talking about here in a second, where, they lose that game 34-20. If you look at every other, every one of their 11 wins, only once did they score under 38 points in a win before this past week. So you basically knew every week that Collinsville was going to score at least 5 touchdowns every game minimum, except for once in a win. And even then they scored 4. So, but the defense. So I think the defense has been overlooked in that regard because again, if you go game by game, you say they allowed 13 points, essentially no points because 2 points was a safety. 14 points, 6 points, 0 points, 12 points, 7 points, 0 points, and then 13 points this last week. So the defense has answered the bell basically every game except for the Wolf City game, which was a shootout. And they gave it 42 against perhaps, if he's not the best running back in 2A, he's one of the best running backs in 2A. And then 21 points against Lindsay in the victories. So that the defense has done a really good job on a week to week basis, and I think that they've kind of gotten overlooked a little bit because maybe the focus has been a little too much on the offense. But this was a game they needed the defense to step up. This was a game where they needed to do a really good job. It was about getting stops because they only forced 1 turnover. But Wellington has trouble running the ball. They only have 29 carries for 82 yards. Passing wise, there were a couple of big plays, but for the most part, it was 50% completion percentage. And they did enough on offense to be able to win this game. Now, so you got Windthorst this week. Windthorst is matching Collinsville record-wise. It's 11-1 versus 11-1. The interesting thing about this matchup is who Windthorst played. Windthorst played Lindsay and won 30-27. So as I just mentioned, Collinsville played Lindsay in district and won that game 55-21. So one team wins by 3, one team wins by 34. If you want to play that game, it's a dangerous game sometimes. But the other thing about that is that Windthorst was trailing for a lot of that game against Lindsay and had to rally to win that game. So this could easily have been a rematch of Collinsville and Lindsay based on the fact that unfortunately Lindsay was unable to hold the lead. They were up 21-6 at halftime. They were up 27-22 in the third quarter, and Windthorst was able to go ahead with about 5 minutes to go by the final score. So if you want to play the comparison game, there's that. If you want to play another comparison game, which is interesting, both of their losses are to Munster. So obviously we know the Collinsville Munster history. That game was tied going into the fourth quarter. Collinsville ends up losing 34-20 in district play, and Windthorst lost to Munster 56-21. So does that put the offenses on the same page, but the Collinsville defense is a little bit better than the Windthorst defense? So there's that. So we have these the score comparisons. This is also I'll say a recent matchup, but these teams met in the region semifinals 2 years ago. Obviously, totally different cast of characters, but Collinsville won that game 32-28. That was a close game. Collinsville had to come back and win that one as well. So there's that recent history as well. I don't know what to expect in this game. You have a Collinsville team trying to get to the region final for the third straight year. You have a Windthorst team that before the last couple years, since it's been Collinsville, Albany. Windthorst was the team getting to the region final. They're trying to get there for the third time in 5 years. It should be a good game. It should be really. This is like I said, this is the point of the year where everybody starts getting good. I mean, it's really hard to find people with bad records, and I feel like 11-1, 11-1. You've both lost to the same person. You have some interesting scores against another common opponent. I know Collinsville's a little, beat up, dealing with injuries the last couple weeks that may make this a little bit closer. But I think you have a situation where maybe it comes down to the last. Maybe it comes down to the last possession or the last couple possessions. Does Windthorst kind of view that they're they've got all the confidence after the way they won last week? It should be exciting. And of course, for both of these teams, it's interesting because the winner getting to the region final is going to play the Munster-Albany winner. So obviously, if Munster advances, it's obviously a rematch for somebody. If Albany advances, this is the two-time defending champion who Collinsville has played in the region final the last 2 years, is the only reason that those great seasons came to an end, short of the state semifinals, which would be the best season in school history because Collinsville's only been there once before. And there's no shame in losing to the eventual champion, but unfortunately for Collinsville, they've had to face them the last 2 times in the region final. And so there's all that in play. And I think, again, you want to talk about a region, look at this Final Four, and you have 11-1 Collinsville, whose only loss is to one of the top teams in the state. 11-1 Windthorst, with a loss again to the same team, one of the top teams in the state. You have a Munster team that has 2 losses, so they're sitting here at 10-2. But if you look at their losses, I think we talked about this when Collinsville and Munster played. One of those losses is to Holiday, who we've already talked about and is still playing. And the other loss was to Pottsboro in a game that came down to the wire. So they're sitting there at 10-2. And again, you have the 2-time defending champion who is 9-2. So you have 11-1 and 11-1 versus 10-2 versus 9-2, and one of those is the two-time defending champion. I mean, that's a power Final Four, and I don't know if you could sit here and say, well, I wouldn't be surprised if any of those 4 advanced to play in the region final. If we saw Munster rematch against either one, if we saw Albany playing either one, I think that's what you want to see at this time of year is, 4 really good teams. I think you could say 4 of the top. Man, there's 16 teams left. I mean, do you have 4 of the top 9 teams left in the state in this region? I mean, that's how good it is. And so we're gonna see what happens. I think those could be 2 really great games coming up on Friday. Obviously, I think Collinsville getting back to the region final, having a redemption story of some sort would be really awesome. But they got to get past Windthorst, and Windthorst is not going to go quietly in that 2A Division II Region 2 semifinal game. Again, 1 p.m. Friday at Springtown to see who gets to the state quarterfinals / region final depending on how you want to look at it. So that's the schedule. We got 2 teams left. Hopefully they're both playing in December. They both got to the region final last year. Again, Collinsville fell short at that point for the second straight year. And Gunner would go on to win another state championship. And we'll see if we have teams playing for another week. Again, it's so exciting to see. I don't, I know we don't talk about a lot of the teams outside of Texoma, but obviously a lot of people keep up with stuff like that. If you're a Denison fan, you're sitting there and we talked about how tough your district was, and the top 3 teams in your district, Walnut Grove, Lovejoy, and Anna, are still playing. So 3 of the final 4 in the region were from Denison's district, to show how tough it was just to try to get into the playoffs. That you had to deal with 3 of the 4 best teams in the region. In Sherman's district, Frisco Reedy and Frisco Wakeland. I think it's Wakeland. Is it Wakeland? But those 2 teams 2 of their teams are still alive. They had to pull off a crazy comeback last week. It's Lone Star. Yeah. Lone Star had to was because Wakeland lost to Highland Park. So Reedy and Lone Star are still kicking out of Sherman's district, and so it's just it's a real fun time of year. There's a lot of crazy scores. Teams that finish with lower seeds. There's a couple regions where all 4 of the teams are still alive, which is crazy, but that's something that's happened. So it's a fun time of year, and it's only going to get even more intense as we get closer to, again, we're almost, we get past this week, we're more than halfway there to teams playing for championships. So that's what we're going to look at here on the podcast. So that's it for here on the podcast. Hope you have a happy Thanksgiving. Hope you have safe travels, whether you're going somewhere to spend the day with family, or whether you're traveling to go to one of these games or any game, because there's plenty of great games in the area. Whether there's a couple down 75, people playing at some of these local stadiums, playing in Melissa, playing in Prosper, playing within a reasonable driving distance. If you just love high school football, you want to see some great matchups, there's a lot to go see. So, but if you're going to Gunner, if you're going up Collinsville, these early afternoon games, please be safe. Buckle up with the weather, because it looks like it's gonna be cold. So be prepared for that. And no matter what happens, we will talk about it here next week on the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast.